All right, welcome to part 2 of the companion AI tutorial. So we'll just continue right where we left off. So the only thing we need to do now is set up that third option for moving to a waypoint. So let's go to our third person character here. And then down here below, we have this move to option that we need to fill out. So we can start writing this, but eventually we're going to have to kind of go off and work on the waypoint itself, but we can at least get started here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a variable here to keep track of whether or not this key is currently down. So let's add a variable and we'll just call it move to key down question mark. And then we want to change it to be a Boolean. So just true or false. And I'm going to move this into the companion category and then set it to private as well. And so we can take this and drag it in twice. And then we want to select true for the top one because we're going to be hooking that up to pressed. But before we do that, we want to make sure that our companion is valid like we did up here. So we can just copy this. I actually want to paste it twice here. So hook this up to pressed and released. And then for the is valid, you can hook up this one and this one like so. And then from here, we need to actually make our waypoint because what we want to do is when they press and they hold down this key here, 3 in this case, then we want to create that waypoint that shows up. I'll just run it again real quick on my other, this is my other project here. Oops, I paused it. Let me run it again. So you can see I'm holding down 3 right now, and so it's showing this waypoint. And then when I let go, it destroys the waypoint and the character moves there, right? So we need to actually create that waypoint actor, and then we can come back here and kind of finish this. So let's go back to our content folder, and then I'm going to make a new folder inside of here, and we'll just call this waypoint. And so inside of here, we want to right click and make a new blueprint class, and we will make it of type actor, and we'll just call it pp underscore the waypoint. And so let's open this guy up. And then over here on the left, let's add a static mesh for the arrow. And then I also added a little point light. So let's add a point light like so. And make sure the point light is not a child of the static mesh, like I have it right here. It should be, it should be like how it looks here, where the point light is a child of the scene root. Like it shouldn't look like this, basically, where the point light is a static mesh child, or else you're going to get problems. So make sure the point light is attached to the scene root like this. Okay, so for the static mesh, you can basically select any static mesh that you want, or I mean, you could totally change this waypoint to look however you want. I'm just going to kind of do something quick here just to make it good enough for this tutorial. So if you search for arrow, there's a couple different arrows here, and these are just engine content things. If you don't have these for some reason, like don't worry, like just you can add whatever you want here. Like you can make your own arrow, or you can make a box or a cube or whatever you want. But I'm just going to use this translate arrow handle, which is just some random arrow that comes with the engine. That looks like this. And I'm just going to rotate it a little bit. So let's see. What did I do in my other project? I'm just going to copy the values for my other project so I don't have to tweak it again. So for the location, I'm going to set it up to 130. So it's up above. And then for the rotation, I have the rotation set to 540 on the X, negative 90 on the Y, and 180 on the Z, which is basically just pointing down like that. And then for the scale, I have it as 1.5, oops, 1.5, 3, and 3, just to make it a little bit bigger. And then I actually created a custom little material for this so it would look nicer. So we can do that real quick. It'll just literally take like a minute. So we can come back here to the Waypoint folder, right click, and say materials and textures. And we want to create a new material like this. And we will just call this m underscore waypoint. And so we'll just open this up real quick. So all we really want to do in here is just give it a nice blue color. So if you hold down 3 on your keyboard and left click, it will create a constant 3 vector. You can also get this by just typing in constant 3 vector right here. It's the same thing. And we want to hook this up to the base color and the emissive color. And then we just want to set the color of this to be some nice blue color, or you can use whatever color you want. I'm going to use blue. And we can hit apply and save. And then we can go back to our BP waypoint. And then over here on the right with the static mesh selected, we can just change this to our m_waypoint color for that one and this one. So now it has that nice kind of blue looking color. And then the final thing we want to do inside of here is we want to add a point light, or we'll change the color of the point light because we already have one. So you want to move this a little bit above the ground. So set the Z to like 20 or something, just so it's a little bit above the ground. And then we want to set the color of it to be whatever you want. I'm going to use that same bluish color, like so. And then for the attenuation radius, I'm going to set this down to like 135, so it's not so big. And then the intensity, we can probably drop down a little bit too. And again, you can play with these numbers, make it look however you want. But you see, if we take this now and we drag it into our world, you can see we have a little waypoint thing here. And one other thing you would notice from my other project when I ran it is that that arrow was kind of bobbing up and down. So let me just run it again to show you. It plays. So when I hold down 3, you can see the arrow kind of moves up and down. So we'll just do that real quick. I think this gives it a cool little effect and it only takes about a second. So to do that, we can do it inside of our begin play. So the first thing we want to do is we want to save the starting location of it. So that way we can kind of move it up and down based on that starting location. So we can drag in our static mesh and we want to save the relative location. So we'll say relative location, we'll get it, and then we will promote this to a variable. And then we want to set it to private just so that, well, because like nobody else should be referencing this. So we'll just set it to private. And then we want to start a timeline. So we'll right click and say add timeline. And we will call this up down because it goes up and down. And we'll hook it up to play. And then if we double click on this to open it up, basically just want to add a little graph in here that goes from 0 to 1 and then back to 0. So we'll hit this float track here. And then you can right click and say add key and just add 3 of them. It doesn't really matter where, just kind of like in this type of shape. And then for this one, we want to set the time to 0 and we want to set the value to 0. For this one, we want to set the time to 0.75, so 3/4 of a second. We want to set the value to 1. And then for this one, we want to set the time to 1.5 and then the value to 0. And then if you just select here anywhere and then press F, it will kind of focus the whole graph. So you can see it goes from 0 to 1 and then back down to 0. And then you want to set this length up here to match. So you can see this one is at 1.5 seconds. So you want to set the length of this thing to be 1.5. So that way the length matches the length of your graph. And then also really, really important, you need to make sure that you select this loop checkbox up here so that it continuously loops. We can compile and save that. And then back in the event graph, we can use this value. Oh, we forgot to rename it actually. So let's open this up real quick. And so we want to rename this from new track. So if you just select this, I think, and maybe right click and say rename, you can call it whatever you want. So this is the offset. So we'll just call it offset. Okay, and then back in our event graph now, we can see we got our offset value right here. So we just want to move our static mesh based off that offset value. So drag in the static mesh, which again is that arrow, and we'll say set relative location and hook that up to the update. And so the new location is going to be the starting relative location, right? Because this is our cached relative location. It's never going to change. And then we want to offset the Z by this offset. So let's drag in the relative location and we want to split it. So right click and say split struct pin. And we can also split this pin as well because the X and the Y are not going to change, right? Because it's only moving up and down. So we only want to change the Z. So we'll hook those up. And then for the Z, we'll drag off of this and say float multiply. And so whatever value you put here is basically going to be how much it moves. So I'm going to set it to 30. But if you want it to, have a more, if you want it to go up and down like further apart or whatever, you can make this value bigger and it will move further. And then we can say float plus, float plus. And so we just want to add that value to the Z and that'll make it kind of go up and down. And so now if we go back and we play it and we look at our arrow, you can see the arrow is bobbing up and down just like we want. And yeah, so again, you can, mess with this and make this waypoint look however you want, but for now, this is good. I don't want to spend too much time making a waypoint for this tutorial because that's not really what it's about, but yeah, so that's good. So now we come back to our third person character and we can actually make use of this waypoint. So Let's just delete it from our world real quick because we don't actually need this one. So back in the world, let's delete it. And then third person character, we can say, so up here, when we hold down the move to button, we want to create the widget. So let's make a function over here on the left. And we will call this create, or not widget, sorry, create waypoint. And then we will make this private because we don't want anybody else calling this function. And then we're going to move it to a companion category just to keep things organized. And so inside of create widget, what we want to do is we want to first make sure that our waypoint, or okay, I guess we need to first create it. So let's right click and say spawn actor. And the actor we want to spawn is our widget or our waypoint. Sorry, if I keep saying widget, it's because that's normally what I say when I'm starting a word with a W inside of Unreal. But if I say widget, I mean waypoint from here on out, just disclaimer. So we want to select our waypoint, so search for waypoint. And then if you just go ahead, because if you try to hook this up right now and you compile it, it's going to give you an error because it wants you to pass in something for the spawn transform. But if you just split it and then compile, then it's fine with it because it can just add defaults for all of these. So just to go ahead and do that. And then we want to take this variable and save it. So say promote to variable, and we will call this our waypoint. And then we can drag this up into the companion category since it has to do with companions, and we'll set it to private as well. And then we want to set it to be hidden by default because it's possible that you might be holding down the key, but you might be looking up at the sky. Like, for example, if I hold down 3, but then I look up in the sky here, like we don't want the waypoint to draw in the sky, obviously, because she can't go there. So by default, we want to set it to hidden. So we'll say set actor hidden in game, and we want to set it to true. And then one other thing we want to do before we complete this function is we just want to make sure that when this function is called that this waypoint doesn't already exist. And so if we drag in our waypoint here and say get, and then right click and convert to validated get, we just want to hook this up at the beginning. And then you want to make sure you drag off of the is not valid, not the top part here. Make sure you have it is not valid going into here because we only want to create the waypoint if it doesn't currently exist, right? Because we don't want to have 2 of them or something. Okay, so that's what that function. So we can go back to the event graph and we can drag this in and say create widget. So it's pretty straightforward. And then when it's released, we want to destroy it, but we first want to tell the character to move to it if it's valid. So I guess we can write that real quick. So let's add a sequence node. You can do that by holding down S and then left clicking. You can also get one by right clicking and searching for sequence. Same thing. But what a sequence node does is that it executes these pins in order. So it's going to do this first, and then it's going to do this first, and you can actually add as many as you want. So then we'll do this third, and it's just a way to organize things. It's not, a lot of people ask me what this does. It's not for like optimizations or anything like that. It's just a way to organize things a little bit better. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to check if the waypoint is hidden or not, because if the waypoint is hidden, then that means that we aren't actually looking at anything, like we're not looking at the ground, like maybe we're just looking up in the sky. So if the waypoint is hidden, then that means there's no valid place for us to move to. But if it's not hidden, then that means we've actually found a place, like it's actually colliding with something that we want to move to. So we can drag in our waypoint here and we can say, okay, guess we're going to save again. Sometimes it just really wants to save, I guess. Okay, and then we can say is hidden. No, what is it called? Hidden. Yeah, get actor hidden in game. So this will return to us whether or not it's currently hidden. And we want to know if it's not hidden. So say not boolean. So if it's not hidden, we'll do a branch off of this. Oops. Just scoot this over. All right, so if it's not hidden, then we actually want to do something. So we want to tell our companion to move to that target. So we'll drag in our companion and we will say move to target, which is the function we've written, but we haven't actually filled it out yet. If you remember, I'll just go to it real quick. It's this one right here, but it's empty right now. Come back and fill it out in a second. So back over here, the location that we want to move to is the location of our waypoint, right? Because wherever the waypoint is where we want her to go. So we'll drag in our waypoint and we'll just say get actor location. And that will go in here, like so. And then finally, we'll just do a little print string just so we can see what's going on. So we'll say string. And we will say moving to location. Oh, did we ever test the stay? Hold on, let me just run this real quick to make sure the stay works. Okay, it did. I just remember I don't think I actually tested the staying, but it seems to work. Okay, sorry for that side branch. Okay, so moving to location. So that's that. And then after this, so the second thing in the sequence we want to do is we want to destroy the waypoint. So we need to write a function for that, just like we did up here. So I'm just going to actually duplicate this function just so it's in the right spot, and we'll say destroy waypoint. But obviously we don't want to do the same thing inside of here, so we want to delete this and delete this, actually delete this. So keep these two. So in this case, we want to make sure that it's valid, and if it is valid, then we want to say destroy actor, and then we want to hook up this set. And we actually can just leave this empty here, because what this does, if you just do set and you don't pass anything, then it sets it to nothing, or it sets it to invalid or null, or however you want to say it. But it basically invalidates it, so that if this is called, it will hit this in the future. Oops. Okay, so that's all we need to do here. And then we come back to our event graph, and we can say destroy waypoint, and we can hook that up. Okay, let me double check. Yep, okay, I think that is good here. So now the only part we really need to do here, because it's not going to quite work yet, because if we try to run this and we press 3, you'll see I'm holding down 3 right now. It doesn't actually show up anywhere, and that's because it's being spawned. If you remember, it's being spawned at the origin. We're just spawning that at 0, 0, 0. So it actually is being created. It's just being created at the origin of the map, which, who knows where that actually is. So what we need to do is inside the event graph, or inside of the event tick, rather. So each tick, we need to set the location of the waypoint to wherever the character is looking. And so that way it kind of moves around based on, where you're aiming, right? So let's just right click and say event tick. We'll put this down here at the bottom. So we don't want to do this all the time, right? We only want to do this if the move to key is down. So we'll drag this in, and then we only want to do it if this is down and if our companion is valid, right? Because if we don't have a current companion, then there's really no point of doing all this waypoint stuff, because there's nobody to actually move to the waypoint. So we can also say waypoint, or sorry, we can also say companion is valid. And we want to and these to make sure they're both true. So we'll say and boolean. And then we can take the result of that and check it with a branch. Okay, so if these are both valid, then we actually want to update our waypoint. So let's make a function over here, and we will just call this tick, because it's being called each tick. And tick waypoint, I guess, is a good name. Tick waypoint. And we come back here to our event graph, and we will call this right here. And then let's also move this into the companion category and set it to private, just to be good programmers. And then inside of here, we can fill this out. This should basically be the last thing we need to do. So this function is going to be broken down into 2 parts. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to find a valid location to move to. So based on wherever the character is looking, we're kind of do like a line trace and figure out what he's looking at, and try to find a place that's reachable by the nav mesh. And then after that, if we do find a place, then we want to update the waypoint to be at that location. So since we're going to be doing 2 things, I'm just going to use a sequence node. So again, hold down S and left click to create a sequence. And the top part here, we're going to start with a line trace, because we need to figure out where the character is actually looking. So we'll say line trace by channel, hook that up. And we want the line trace to be based on where they're looking, so we need to use the camera. So we can drag in our follow camera, or whichever camera you happen to be using, and say get world location. And that is going to be where it starts at, right? Because we want it to start at the location of the camera. And then we want it to go from the camera into the world along the camera's forward vector. So if we drag off this, we can say get forward vector. So this is the direction. And so we want to add the direction to the location, but we want to multiply it by some value so that it's very far off into the world, like the line trace goes very far. So we can say float multiply, and then you can pass whatever number you want here. I'm going to use 5,000, but basically this number is how far the player can tell them to move to. So if you make this a really small number and you're looking at something that's far away, it won't collide with it and you won't be able to tell them to move to it. So you can kind of change it based on how you want your game to work. But I'm going to use 5,000 and we can say vector plus, and we just want to add these two vectors together, right? And that will be our end location. So it goes from the camera and then it ends at some distance way off in the direction that the camera's looking. And then I guess we can turn on, for right now, we can turn on draw debug type. We can say for 1 frame, just so we can actually see it being drawn. And then we want to check if it actually hits something. So we'll do a branch, because if it doesn't hit something, then we don't really care, right? Because that means we're just looking at the sky. So we want to make sure we're actually looking at something. And then if we are, then we can drag off this and then say break hit result. And so this hit struct is basically all the information about where the line trace hit in the world. And so this location is where it actually hit. But if you remember, let me just run my other project real quick. If you remember, like we could be looking at this bus or this train, right? So right now I'm currently looking at the front of this train, right? But the waypoint is still rendering or it's still being drawn in front of the train. It's not being drawn like literally where I'm looking. It's being drawn on the ground in front of the train, like at a location the character can walk to. So if I release it, you can see she figures out how to get close to where I was looking. So we can't just like tell them to go directly to this location because this location might not be on the ground. Like we might not actually be looking at the ground. So there's a handy little function to take a location and tell it to find like the best location on the nav mesh, and it is called project point to navigation. And so it takes in a point and it projects it to the navigation, and then these extents are basically um, how far it will reach to try to find the navigation mesh. So for the X and the Y, which is like left and right, we want to only set it to like 100 because we don't want it to be too big, because then they might not be moving very close to where we are looking at. But for the Z, we want it to be pretty high, like something like 500. And the reason we want that, or actually I use 600 before. And the reason we want it to be high on the Z is so that if we are looking high up, like I'm looking up here, you can see the arrow is still showing at the bottom. So even if I'm looking high and telling her to go at something, like maybe I'm looking at a pull out in the distance, we still want to be able to, have her move to the base of whatever we're looking at. But if we're looking like super high, then obviously we don't want that to work. So you want to set some value here like 600 so that they can there's some forgiveness as to where they're looking. And so this, if it returns a valid value, it'll let us know with this boolean. So we can say branch. Because again, if we're looking at the sky, we're looking too high up, it's not going to return something. But if it is, then this will be true. And in that case, we want to save this value and we want to save the fact that we found a valid spot. So I'm going to make two local variables over here. I'm going to call this first one move to location found, question mark. So this is whether or not it's been found. And if it has, then we'll set this to true. And then the other one we want to create is the location. So move to location. And then we want to change this one to a vector. And then just drag this up over here, say set, and hook this guy up to that like so. So again, just to kind of recap here, we're just doing a line trace into the world in the direction we're looking. And then whatever we hit, we are trying to find a place on the nav mesh that is close to that. And if we do find one, then we say move to location found, sets to true, and we save the location. And so that's the first part. So let's just maybe add a little comment around all of this. You can just press C to add a comment, by the way. And we'll just say, find a valid, or try to find a valid spot based on where the player is looking, right? And then after that, we want to check if the move to location was found. So we can drag in the move to location found, and we'll say branch. And we want to hook this up to the second part. So we'll drag this down like so. So if a location was found, then we want to set the waypoint to that location. So we'll say waypoint set actor location, like so. And the location is our move to location. So we just drag that in and we just say teleport. But one thing you might notice here, a potential problem, is that if it doesn't find a location, We don't want the waypoint to just linger at its last known location. We want to actually hide it. So in order to do that, we can just do a little trick over here. We can drag in the waypoint before we do all this, and we can say set hidden or set actor hidden in game. And we want to set it to the opposite of this, because if we found a location, then we want to set it to be visible. Otherwise, we want to set it to be invisible. So we can just say not Boolean, which will flip it from true to false or false to true. And we can hook that up. And then we can, if you hold down Control and drag, you can actually move this to be over here. And then we can hook this up like so. So all we're doing down here is we are updating the visibility of our waypoint. And then we are checking if the location has been found. If it has, then we're setting the location to that location. All right, so then we'll just add a little comment here. This is update visibility and location of waypoint, like so. All right, and now back in our event graph. Oh, we're actually already calling that, so I think we might actually be good here. So if we go ahead and run this, and we hold down 3, you can see it's doing a line trace. It's a little weird right now, and I can explain why to fix that in a second. But the reason why it's kind of weird is because the camera is actually directly behind the player, and so the line trace is going through the player, and so it's a little weird. And so in order to fix that, we just need to move the camera to be like a side view, which is how most games have it. So if you come back here and you click on the follow camera, actually we want to click on the camera boom since we're using a spring arm. If you're doing first person, this won't actually be a problem. You won't have to do this, as you probably already found out. But if you're doing third person, you need to kind of offset the camera. So for the socket offset, let's just add like, oops, that's all right. On the Y, let's add like 100, and then on the Z, let's go up a little bit, like 40 maybe, just so we're not looking directly at the player. So now we're kind of offset a little bit. So now if I hold down 3, you can see it's drawing our waypoint. And if we let go, well, nothing quite happens yet because we haven't written that code, but the functionality of the waypoint is working, right? When we're holding down the button, it shows up. If we look up in the sky, it should go away. If we look at a pole or something, as long as we're not looking too high up the pole, 600 might be too high, but if we're looking really high up the pole, it's not actually going to render at the bottom. I can show you that if I go to this mode and then look at this pole and then eject. So F8, you can see it's not actually drawing a waypoint down here because we're looking so high up this pole that it's not hitting that box extents, right? Okay, so we can turn off that line trace now because we don't need the debugging thing. So let's go back to the third person character, go to the tick waypoint, and then we can turn this to none. And now if we run this, you can see we don't have that line anymore. So now the last thing we need to do here is make it so she actually moves to that location. Oh, and I think also in my other video, I have a little dot in the middle of the screen. I guess I can show you guys how to do that since I have it in my beginning video. It's really simple. I just created a really, really simple widget just so you could kind of tell where you're aiming. So maybe let's just go back to the third person blueprint, and then this will just take a second. And then maybe inside of blueprints, you can do this wherever you want, but just right click and say user interface and create a widget blueprint and just call it the BP or the HUD widget. If you already have a HUD with an aimer, you can ignore this, but this is just a really simple way to do it. And then open this up, and we're just going to add an image into the center of our canvas panel. So drag it in and then set it to centered for the anchor point, and then set the position to 0, 0, and then the size set it like 8 by 8 or something pretty small. Let me zoom in here so we can actually see it. And then for the alignment, we want 0 0.5, 0 0.5 so that it's centered. And then for the color and opacity, I'm just going to set this down to like 0.5. So like ideally in a real game, you would have, if you hit this brush drop down, you would have like an image here for your cursor, which would be like a circle or whatever you want. But I don't really care for this project. Like it's not about a HUD, but this will just tell us where we're looking at. It'll just draw a little square in the middle of the screen. But you know, if you have an actual cursor image you want to use, like you could select whatever you want and it would draw that here instead. Yeah, okay. So now we just need to add this to the viewport for the player. So in the third person blueprint, we can go back to the event graph real quick. And then up here at the top, we'll just do it in begin play. So let's just add the event begin play. And we'll just say create widget. And we'll create the HUD widget. And for the owning player, we can just say get controller, which will get our controller, except this expects a player controller. So we'll just say cast to player controller, since that's what our controller actually is. And then all I did right there, I just right clicked and said this button at the bottom here, which converts it between pure and impure. And you could do that if you know it's going to succeed. You don't need to actually check it because we know it's going to succeed. And then we can say add to viewport, like so. All right, so now if we run this, it'll look like it did in my videos. We have this little dot in the middle of the screen, just so we can kind of see where we're aiming a little bit better. Okay, so let's do this last part now, where she actually moves to wherever I tell her to. Let me just save real quick. And we need to figure out where we left off as well. I think it's just the behavior tree is the last thing we have to do. So, okay, so move to target. We called this. Let's go inside here. Okay, so this is empty, so we need to do this still. So this is gonna be pretty straightforward. Let me open up on my other monitor. Okay, so we want to do two things. We want to set the target location inside of our blackboard, which actually we might need to create that variable too. I think we forgot. So we need to tell her where to go, basically. And we also need to set the state to moving to target. So if we go to our blackboard, let me check if I did this. No, I didn't. Okay, so we just need to add another key here. And it's going to be of type vector. And this will be the target location. So this is what it will use whenever she's told to go somewhere specifically. Let's save that. And then back in our companion for move to target, we want to make another function inside of our controller like we did for these. So I'm just going to double click on, I'm just going to open up the BP companion controller. And then below these two events that we made before, let's just create one more. It's going to be just like these. It's going to be really simple. So add event, and we'll call this set target location. Just let me capitalize that L. And then for this one, it's going to take in a vector, obviously, for the location. So add an input parameter, make it a vector, and call it target location. And then we want to say blackboard. So I'm going to copy this guy and say set value. And then again, we need to select a vector because the location, the target location is a vector. So we need to say set value as vector. And then we can just hook this up like that. And then for the key name, we can drag off this again and say make literal name like we did before. And then again, it's really important that this name that you pass here matches what's in the blackboard. So I'm just going to go to the blackboard and then 2, and then copy. And then back here, I'm just going to paste just to make sure I get the name right. Target location. Okay. And then back in our companion, we can call that function. So we'll copy our companion controller again. And we will call set target location. And the location is going to be whatever's passed in. And then just like we did up here for these two, we want to call this set companion state. So I'm just going to copy this. And we want to set the companion state to moving to target. Okay, and so when we do that, it will cause our behavior tree. So if we go back to our behavior tree, it will cause our behavior tree to fail both of these cases. So now we need to add that third and final case over here for moving to target. And then we should be done. So we're going to need another composites here. For this one, we want to use a selector because, or let me think. No, we want to use I used a selector before. I'm looking at my other code, but I think we should actually probably use a sequence because what we want to do is we want to have them move to that location. And then once they get there, we want to have them wait. So we want to do two things, like one after the other. So for that, we can do a sequence. So let's add a sequence. And then we will add a move to node. So we'll say move to. And then for this one, we want to select, for the blackboard key, we want to select the target location this time because that's where they're moving to. They're not moving to the follow after, moving to the target location. And then we want to add a blackboard decorator. So right click on this and say blackboard. And we'll select this guy. We'll rename it to moving to target. And then we'll say blackboard key is going to be our companion state. And we want to make sure that that is equal to moving to target. And then again, really important, make sure you select observer boards. Make sure you set that to self so that it can abort. And then we hook this up. And then we want to go here. And then after we do that, we want to tell him, or we want to tell her, our companion, to go back to the waiting state, right? Because when they get to the location they want to go to, or we tell them to go to, we want to have them just wait there. So we need a way to set this variable, this companion state, from our behavior tree. And if you ever need custom behavior inside of a behavior tree, you can do that by creating a task. So we're going to create a really simple task here, and it's just going to call that function and allow us to change our state. So up here at the top, just hit new task, and that'll create a new task for us. If you hit the browse button, it will bring you back to where it created it. And I'm just going to rename it to something a little bit better. So I'm going to call it BTT, or behavior tree task, and then underscore set companion state. And then if we open this up, it's going to be really simple. We want to override and say receive execute AI. So this will get called whenever the task gets ran. And then we want to take this controller and cast it to our companion controller. And then we want to call that function the set companion state function. And we want to set it to whatever they set it to in this task. So we can actually just right click and say promote to variable. And then we will call this the companion state. And it's really important over here on the right, you want to select that it's instance editable, and that will allow us to edit it in the behavior tree. You'll see that in a second here. We can also set it to blueprint read only and private, since it's never going to change. And then we want to, finally, when you're writing tasks, you need to use this finish execute whenever you're done to tell it that it's done executing. So we want to hook this up, and we just want to say success, right? Because it's just a one-time thing. It just sets the companion state to whatever they pass in, and then it finishes. So if we come back here now, we can actually just use this, and we can say BTT, and you can find the one we just created. And then this is why we set it to expose on spawn, because you see up here at the top right where it says companion state, we can actually just select whatever we want. So we actually just want waiting in this case, so we'll just leave it as waiting. And so what it's going to do, just like it says, it's going to do a sequence. So it's going to move to the target location, and then when that finishes, it's going to set the companion state back to waiting. So it's going to come back here and it's going to wait. All right. Did we do everything? So we set the target location, which this is actually doing something. And then we set the companion state. Okay, I think we did. So I think we might be good. So I'm just going to save everything real quick, and then we'll give it a test. And hopefully it should work. Might have forgot something. So we hit play. All right, so if I hold down the 3 key and then I let go, you can see she moves to the location, and then she waits there. Let me just make sure she doesn't do anything funky here. Seems to be good. And if I tell her to go here, go here. Oh, she doesn't seem to abort. Did we forget to set it to abort? Let's double check. So back here on restart changed. Let me look at my other project real quick. All right, so I figured out the problem. I actually forgot to do this in my other project. So yeah, so just to demonstrate real quick what I was talking about. So if you play it and you tell her to go like way over here, and then while she's on your way, you tell her to come here, you see she actually doesn't do it until she gets over there. So she kind of waits, and then she comes back. So what we want to do here is, the reason that's happening is because like it's never really exiting this first move to, because it thinks like she's still moving to that location. So we kind of need to trick it a little bit, and we need to tell it whenever we say move to target, let's just, before we say set component state, let's just set the component state to waiting, and then we'll set it to moving to target. So it kind of like resets it each time. So now if we run this and we tell her to move all the way over here, and then we tell her to move here, you can see she immediately changes locations and goes to wherever we tell her to go to, which is what my initial intent was, but apparently I didn't do right. Okay, and then we can tell her to follow, and she'll follow. And yeah, tell her to move. And so yeah, it seems to be working. So if you guys enjoyed the tutorial, I really appreciate a like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon if you guys want to support me there. It's always super appreciated. And I also have a Discord link. All that info is in the description of this video. If you guys want to join the Discord, we always like to see new members. But otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.